Welcome to Professor Burkett's lesson on phrases, how to identify and punctuate them. This is a lesson in the art of grammar and of punctuation. Well, what is a phrase? A phrase is not quite a clause, lacking one or more elements of a complete clause. A phrase is a dependent or subordinate group of words that lacks either a subject or a predicate, or sometimes both. Phrases are dependent in that they rely on clauses for their function and meaning. There are varieties of phrases, including modifying phrases, and by modifying I mean adjective or adverb phrases, such as prepositional phrases and absolute phrases. There are noun phrases, including appositive phrases, and there are various kinds of verbal phrases, such as participial phrases, infinitive phrases, and gerund phrases. For this lesson and the class quiz, we will focus on 5 kinds of phrases: prepositional phrases, participial phrases, infinitive phrases, appositive phrases, and absolute phrases. As an overview of this lesson, let's look at the form and function of the 5 kinds of phrases that we're focusing on. Prepositional phrases start with a preposition and function as adjective or adverb phrases. Participial phrases start with a participle and function as adjective phrases. Infinitive phrases start with, you guessed it, an infinitive and function as either noun, adjective, or adverb phrases. Appositive phrases start with a noun and function as noun phrases that rename other nouns, usually the immediately adjacent or previous noun. Absolute phrases start with a noun plus participial construction and function to modify whole clauses and whole sentences. First, prepositional phrases. Prepositional phrases begin with prepositions, including noun or pronoun, called object of the preposition, and any modifiers of the subject. Prepositional phrases serve as modifiers. Example of the adjective function. Our house in Wake Forest is a cabin. I could say our house is a cabin, but the prepositional adjective phrase in Wake Forest modifies house here. Next, in the function of an adverb. From Grandfather Mountain in North Carolina, hikers can often see into Tennessee. And so our prepositional adverb phrase modifies the verb in the main clause. Second, participial phrases. These begin with present or past participles. A participial phrase is set off by commas when the phrase is a non-restrictive or an introductory phrase. Here are some examples. A dog howling at the moon kept me awake. And here we have the verbal adjective howling at the moon modifying dog. Or next, irritated by the delay, Louise complained about the city's traffic. And irritated by the delay modifies the grammatical subject of the sentence, in this case, Louise. A caution about participial phrases. Beware of dangling participles. A dangling participle is an illogical rupture and confusion between a sentence's grammatical meaning and the author's intended meaning. How about some examples here? Irritated by the delay, the traffic gave Louise a reason to complain. What does this mean? Who is irritated by the delay? According to the meaning of the sentence, that is, according to the grammar, the traffic is irritated by the delay, but traffic is not capable of being irritated. What the author meant is Louise is irritated, so we have to rewrite the sentence and put Louise into the subject position. How about the next dangling participle? Putting on the green, the gopher surprised my friend at the golf course. What? Is the gopher putting on the green? I don't think so. What the author means is his friend was putting on the green. So we need to put friend into the grammatical position of the subject. So just be aware with participial phrases that they're adjectives and they need to modify the grammatical subject of the sentence. when that participial phrase comes before the main clause. Third, infinitive phrases begin with infinitives. Note that infinitive phrases are rarely set off by commas because either they function as a noun, as a object complement or a subject complement, or they function as modifiers on the right side of the sentence, modifying the predicate. Let's look at some examples. My goal is to be a skyscraper architect. And here the infinitive phrase as a noun functions as the subject complement of a sentence. Next, a vote would be a good way to evaluate short stories. And here, the infinitive to evaluate modifies way or good way, so it's an adjective. Next, writers should always proofread carefully to perfect a draft. And here the infinitive to perfect modifies the verb proofread, and so we have an adverb. So these are infinitive phrases. Fourth, appositive phrases. An appositive phrase renames the noun or pronoun immediately preceding it. An appositive phrase is set off by commas when the phrase is non-restrictive, which is most of the time. Examples: his sister, comma, a staff writer for Newsweek, comma, will visit our campus. And so the appositive phrase provides more information and sort of redefines, renames, describes the noun. And the noun here is sister. Or in a restrictive sense, his sister Julia will visit campus next week. And his sister is restated according to her name, Julia. But since the appositive is more specific, it is restrictive and does not need to be set off by commas. You can hear that by the flow. You don't want to slow down the reader by putting extra commas around Julia. Next, William Wordsworth, a writer of the Romantic era, the poet laureate of England for 7 years, a radical in France who turned conservative in England, helped shape how we use language. So here we have a series of 3 appositive phrases that modify William Wordsworth. They are all non-restrictive and parenthetical because they provide extra information that define William Wordsworth. The sentence would work just fine, it would be less informative, if we jumped from the grammatical subject, William Wordsworth, to the verb and the object. Let's try that. William Wordsworth helped shape how we use language today. But the appositives provide some helpful information. The final example, an appositive, a noun or noun phrase that renames, defines, or adds information to a noun it immediately follows, simply means put next to. And here, this long appositive phrase, I thought it necessary to separate from the main clause, not with commas, but with dashes. And a dash is just a strong, highly visible comma. So these are some definitions and some examples of the appositive phrase. Fifth are the absolute phrases. It gets its name from classical studies and language studies, where this is called the genitive absolute. So in English, we call it the absolute phrase. Absolute phrases modify an entire sentence and consist of a noun followed by a participial phrase. Absolute phrases are always set off by commas. Let's look at 2 examples. He bicycled down the mountain, the wind whipping his hair. Well, can you see that this is an absolute phrase? Well, you have to look for the pattern here, or the form. You have the noun, the wind, followed by the participle, whipping, and in this case it's an entire participial phrase, whipping his hair. So you have a noun followed by a participle. Second example, her fears laid to rest, she climbed into the plane for her first solo flight. Well, can you recognize this not just as a participle, but as an absolute phrase? Her fears laid to rest. And so you have a A noun, her fears, followed by a past participle, laid. And in this case, a participial phrase, laid to rest. And this modifies the entire sentence. So absolute phrases are important and common in writing, but young writers are sometimes not familiar with them and don't recognize them. So take a good look at these before moving on. So, in summary, prepositional phrases begin with prepositions. Participle or participial phrases begin with present or past participles. Infinitive phrases begin with infinitives. Appositive phrases rename an adjacent noun. Absolute phrases modify an entire sentence and consist of a noun plus participle construction. Let's play Name That Phrase for the final 3 slides. Can you name the phrase in red here? The dash, a strongly visual, fun, but rather informal bit of punctuation, acts just like a strong comma. Well, what's the function of the phrase in red here? Well, it renames the dash, and so in function in renaming, we know it's an appositive phrase, and we set it off, either with commas or, in this case, a dash. Well, name that phrase. The team worked all summer. The coach is teaching not only new plays, but also the virtue of teamwork. Well, what kind of phrase and function is happening in red here? Well, you have the coaches, a noun, followed by teaching, a participle, and once we see that construction, we know it's an absolute phrase. And an absolute phrase, you remember, modifies the whole sentence or the whole main clause. An absolute phrase. Name that phrase. Name the phrase in red. After writing 2 essays, the student writers thought they were ready for a break. Well, we know that after is a preposition, and so this is a prepositional phrase. And after is also an adverb here. And so we should easily recognize this as a prepositional phrase. Well, the end. In summary, let's review the main purposes for identifying phrases. When writers know their basic phrases, they not only write more clearly and correctly, thus earning better grades and approval from important people, but also write with better style because they can choose the apt phrase to achieve their purpose. And that's the main and important reason for being able to identify the basic kinds of phrases. Well, thank you for your attention. I look forward to seeing you in class.